Hello and welcome to Say That Again Slowly, Cambridge Festival podcast where students at Cambridge University chat with the experts who have contributed to the festival. We try to pair up students with researchers and authors from very different disciplines to bring things back to the basics, so there are no stupid questions here. My name is Scarlett Croft and I'm a third year English student taking special papers in the medieval supernatural and visual culture. Today, I'll be interviewing Stefanie Ullmann, who is doing a talk called Counter Speech and its Potential to Fight Online Hate or Misinformation, which is an online event that will be from 4 to 5 p.m. on the 4th of April. So to begin with, Stefanie, please may you introduce yourself and...
Yeah, great. Thanks, Scarlett. So my name is Stefanie. I am a postdoctoral research associate at CRASH, the Center for Research in the Arts, Social Sciences and Humanities. And specifically, I work for a project called Giving Voice to Digital Democracies, where we are interested in the social and ethical implications of language-based artificial intelligence.
Wow, that sounds amazing. And so the talk itself is about counter speech. So just starting at the very beginning, what exactly is counter speech and how would you define it? How do you define it in your work?
So counter speech, I guess the official definition would be counter speech is any kind of direct response to hateful or harmful speech, which seeks to undermine it. That's how the Dangerous Speech Project defines it, which is a group of people, researchers who've done a lot on this subject. It essentially goes back to the idea of more speech and good speech is a better way of fighting harmful speech or evil speech. There's so many different labels for it. But better speech, more speech is better than censorship, essentially. So deleting it, blocking content is seen as not as effective as countering it with more speech.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I guess another kind of basic question, which I think we kind of all understand what it means, but it might be useful just to think about a bit more. So what would you say constitutes online harm? And perhaps is there a difference between that and hate speech?
I would say hate speech is kind of the most prominent term that kind of means most to the public, I suppose.
Yeah.
But essentially, harmful speech or hate speech, also, there have been different labels: toxic speech, dangerous speech. There's any kind of a form of expression that can be text, that can be video, images, but any kind of form of expression that has the potential to incite violence or aggression against another person or a group of people. And mostly that is based on specific characteristics of that person or a group of people, like age, gender, sexual orientation, nationality, and things like that.
Yeah. So I guess you've already spoken about this briefly when you said more speech is preferable to censorship. But I suppose, is there anything else you would like to add about why counter speech is a preferable approach? I guess thinking specifically about who censorship often targets. I wonder if you have any thoughts on
that. Yeah, sure. I would say what makes counter speech particularly valuable is the potential it has to reach online bystanders or people who are just observing, following a conversation, not necessarily the perpetrators themselves. I think it's, in most cases, really unlikely that someone is going to change their mind upon reading a counter speech comment and say, oh yes, I'm sorry, I was wrong, I apologize. That is not necessarily the goal. I think the biggest advantage of counter speech is, well, I suppose twofold. On the one hand, it will be showing affiliation with the victim, making them feel less alone. On the other hand, it will be, there are always people following the conversation, and maybe people who are kind of on the brink of becoming perpetrators themselves,
Mhm.
and kind of stopping those people or saying something that could potentially keep them from becoming perpetrators.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That is something that I would say censorship, deleting a comment, does not
Can't
necessarily.
do. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I guess this is just thinking about how that actually happens, in terms of both, if people are kind of providing the counter speech, or whether counter speech can become an automated response, and if so, just how that works, and what kind of data it processes in order to kind of work out what is hateful or not. That wasn't really a question. That was more of a statement. But any responses?
Yeah, there are lots of questions or potential areas in that comment. Actually, I guess the first thing to address would be maybe to talk about what could counter speech look like, or like what is the basis. So counter speech, there are different types and techniques that people can use, and what has been observed so far by just users on social media like Twitter, Facebook. So it might just be pointing out that someone has been misrepresenting something, that a fact has been made that is not true. Just pointing that out, and also maybe specifically pointing out that what someone said is hurtful and is potentially racist or sexist. Like, it might actually be the case that someone is not aware, and then just saying, hey, what you just said is extremely hurtful, can already be helpful. In a lot of contexts, humorous responses seem to work really well. Like, even combine that with an image, turn it into a meme, and I've seen some nice memes, or one that shows like a bird that has kind of like a closed beak, and then it basically said on the image, please stop tweeting, Mr. Basically that's a nice and not too I guess aggressive way of saying please shut up.
Yeah, definitely.
So yes, so these kinds of things have been found to work really well, whereas aggressive behavior, maybe insulting someone back, would just contribute further to escalating a situation. So
yeah, definitely. Yeah, that makes sense. I guess what I'm wondering is, I was just doing some reading around the subject, and I saw something about like Hateometer or something, which sounded slightly strange to me, but I guess could work. And I was just wondering if, like, what would that mean? As in, would someone get a notification saying that something hateful has come up, like on their profile, or would there be like a pre-warning? I'm just wondering how, also what it would feel like to receive that notification on top of the speech. I guess it's kind of affirming, because if you think that something is being said that is sexist, for instance, and you already have the platform confirming that that thing is being sexist, then a lot of those doubts about you perhaps being overly worried about something are confirmed. But yeah, I was just thinking about what that actually might look like for the user and kind of the interface of the program.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. The Hateometer or Hateometer, or we kind of suggested that in context of quarantining online hate speech. But that could be combined with counter speech. It doesn't necessarily have to, but that is also a way of letting people know straight away what you're typing here, or what you're posting, what you want to post, could potentially be hateful. So are you really sure you want to do this? So that will be the first step, asking someone who's composing a comment, are you sure you want to post this? But then also kind of adding an additional layer of protection for all the other users who might be reading this or might be the direct recipients of a message.
Mm-hmm.
Putting a message automatically in quarantine, like you would with a computer virus, for example, and asking the user, do you actually want to see this? This could be hate speech. This could be sexist, could be racist.
Mm-hmm.
So that the user has the option, no, I don't want to look at this. I want to delete it straight away.
That makes
sense. That's also a way of avoiding the kind of issue of censorship and blocking people and deleting content.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense, especially if it's then feels like it's more up to the user rather than the program itself is deciding everything arbitrarily. So I guess I was thinking about you spoke a bit in an article about kind of biases, and you were talking about in this context, you were talking about, I believe, kind of the gender of artificial intelligence and the issue of gendered language. So I guess I was just thinking about how we can make sure an approach like this doesn't kind of reinforce the biases that we already have. Obviously, it's coming from a very different place than censorship, in terms of it's trying, well, perhaps initially it could seem like it was coming from quite a similar place, because censorship kind of, I'm thinking about the things that are censored on Instagram, a lot of accounts of like, for example, I follow a page about disabled woman who talks about her experiences, and a lot of her content gets censored. And I was just thinking, so Instagram is saying that it goes against the community guidelines. How do we make sure a program like this or doesn't kind of reinforce those ideas of kind of protecting the community, which actually means kind of othering some people from the community, if that makes sense? Or do you think that that is a slightly separate issue from what you were talking about here?
No, not at all. I think it's very, very connected and a really good point. I guess that's kind of the bias issue is something that affects all different kinds of online content. So I think like images would be a bit more difficult. I can speak more about text really.
Yeah.
But in context, it would really, I would say it's impossible to get rid of all biases. And that, in my opinion, shouldn't necessarily be the goal, but there is a lot we can do, and it all comes down really to what we choose in the form of data, what we choose in order to train an AI system.
Yeah.
In a lot of these examples, systems are trained on just billions of words and parameters that have just been scraped from the internet.
Yeah.
Of course, the internet itself is not a very balanced and just place, but there are a lot of biases, of course. So I think a lot of attention should be paid on selecting and preparing the actual training data.
Yeah, definitely.
That is an inevitable step. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then of course, I mean, you can't really guarantee that something will, or that something won't be, no, let me rephrase this. So you can't really guarantee that everything that gets flagged up is truly hate speech. Sarcasm, for example, is a really difficult expression for an AI system to recognize correctly. So
yeah, definitely.
False positives for sure, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That answered your question.
Yeah. No. Yeah, it definitely did. Yeah, that's really helpful. So I guess I was wondering if you have seen any idealized or ideal ways or programs that kind of get this balance right? Or is it kind of too much in the blueprint at the moment that you haven't really seen it actually in practice?
With regard to counter speech or
Yeah, with regards to counter speech, I guess, I mean, in some ways we see counter speech online all the time. But I was wondering if there was any like specific program that you think manages it well, or yeah.
Yeah, I think humans do it really well, which is good.
Yeah.
So,
Good starting place.
yeah, I definitely see a lot of examples generated by humans. And even if you look at hashtag campaigns like Me Too or Black Lives Matter, that's a form of counter speech as well.
Yeah.
And that's been done really well, but essentially by humans. And I think that, so far, I would say there's definitely no program or AI system that can really do it well. We've been kind of working together with students from the engineering department to kind of improve systems a little bit to produce counter speech automatically, but it's a really tricky task. It's hate speech detection is already difficult, and thankfully there's a lot that has been done in recent years. But counter speech is really difficult because it takes so much context, and so like lengthy conversations that you sometimes need to have with people to really have some kind of effect.
Yeah.
But the good thing is there are definitely, even in my daily life when I scroll through Instagram, I see people responding really well to harmful content, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, definitely.
And also, maybe if I can just add this, I don't think that like an AI system should necessarily replace what humans do in that context, because humans are so much better doing it.
Yeah.
And the nuances better. But I think that an AI system can assist, especially people who do this professionally or, voluntarily, for certain campaigns and activists who do this, because it can be a really laborious, sometimes lonely process. And I think it can, technology can certainly assist humans and maybe doing it more effectively and spreading the message more and wider.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's important to acknowledge that also it's a valuable thing for humans to be able to engage in that discourse, and doing it online it's just kind of part of our lives. Like it's not really any different to if we were kind of countering, and that technology can help kind of amplify and direct the conversation in hopefully a more constructive way than it might have done. I was also just wondering about, how you came about kind of this topic as itself as well.
The topic counter speech has been kind of on my mind, I guess, and kind of following my work for almost 2 years. I think that was the first time we started, like within the project, started talking about this and noticing a lot of emerging research, and we thought it was really interesting. And then we hosted a workshop actually last September. I organized a workshop on counter speech, bringing together lots of people from different research fields like law and social sciences and anthropology, mathematics, computer science. And it felt really like such an important and timely subject. But I also kind of feel like people who are not necessarily working on this every day or regularly might not be too familiar with what the concept of counter speech actually is. And so I thought it would be an interesting talk to give at the Cambridge Festival, because it reaches so many different people, and if someone takes something away from it and thinks, oh, I can do this as well, that would be a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like it's something that everyone might inadvertently kind of know what it is, but not kind of the precise meaning of it, if
Yeah.
you know what I mean.
Yeah.
As soon as you started kind of explaining it more, it makes perfect sense in terms of the experiences that I've had online. I guess I was thinking about I just can't remember the word. Oh yeah, I was thinking about the kind of concept of echo chambers and how that kind of works in terms of counter speech, whether or not it kind of makes echo chambers more amplified, um, or whether it could be a way of kind of ensuring that, I guess, if we have the idea of like two echo chambers that are separate actually interact, particularly in the case of maybe human counter speech. Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, I just wondered if you had any thoughts on kind of how counter speech might be valuable or might be a problem for echo chambers.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think what the ultimate goal would be is to break into the echo chambers and kind of disrupt them, because that's the whole problem, that you're kind of get sucked into more and more of content that is not necessarily good for you or for
Yeah,
others, depending on, I mean, but successful counter speech might be a way of kind of disrupting those echo chambers and kind of preventing maybe things like polarization, radicalization.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, like a bit similar to what I said earlier, is like reaching those people who are maybe at the moment in a vulnerable state and are
yeah,
kind of at risk of becoming radicalized or kind of being sucked into an echo chamber that is going to lead to some extremist ideas and behaviors. And I think if counter speech is used strategically well, it can kind of intersect there and kind of prevent that from happening. Of course,
yeah.
not in very extreme cases where someone is just oblivious to
Any
um,
other options?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no, that seems like definitely a good way of thinking about it. I guess I was just thinking about, obviously, there are some things which are beyond counter speech's control. But actually, just I was thinking about the way that advertising interacts with kind of what you search up and things like that. So in a way, counter speech can be productive in kind of regulating what people are looking at to a certain extent, and therefore also kind of hopefully, I guess the idea is that you might possibly get less advertising for kind of extreme things or even not extreme things but harmful, difficult things. I don't know if that's something that you've been thinking about at all or have talked.
That's a that's a good point. I would say, because obviously the big problem with these echo chambers and social media in general, I guess, are feed algorithms that just,
Yeah,
whatever your preferences are, you're just going to get more of it. Uh,
yeah, yeah,
that's in the hands of whoever is in charge of these companies.
mm,
So that's a problem. So ideally, it would be in the interest of these companies as well to deploy more counter strategies to avoid radicalization, to avoid um, the formation of echo chambers. But of course, there are financial benefits to these companies.
yeah,
But I mean, at least I can think of one good example that kind of happened during the pandemic that Facebook decided to use, and that was redirect searches. So whenever
okay,
users search for something about COVID-19, they would be like, the first search results would be credible sources like the World Health Organization or whatever is your national health ministry,
Yeah.
kind of direct users away from conspiracy theories and questionable sources. So it's definitely, we can see it's possible.
Yeah, there just needs to be that kind of motivation
Yeah.
for the company.
It needs to be done by the people in power, unfortunately.
Yeah. I remember even well, Facebook still, anytime you talk about anything related to COVID, they still put up little kind of notification, quite good. And also I remember like if you were like planning an event or something, they would say, I think there was a period where you couldn't host events unless they were online. So it's just a way of like redirecting people very like not even very subtly, but being like, yeah, you can't really do that. But yeah. Tell me a bit about your thoughts about how automated devices like Alexa should respond if a human engages in hateful speech towards that device. And I guess what are the ethical dimensions of that situation?
Yeah, so that's actually kind of a really recent approach that has emerged kind of from counter speech research, is the question, or looking at virtual personal agents like Siri or Alexa, which also get abused quite regularly. And I think that has spiked, especially during the pandemic, people getting increasingly frustrated and just lashing out at their digital assistants. And of course, Alexa, Siri, they're not humans, but it kind of begs the question, how should these systems respond to those forms of abuse or hateful speech? Because it kind of, if you talk for 2 years in a really abusive way to your digital agent, what does that actually do to you when you go back to the real world?
Yeah.
And so, for
I'm
example,
thinking as well of like in the car, like when it gives you directions, and like whenever I'm like driving, someone gets really angry at the person who is speaking, who is telling you to like turn around. Like that's such a classic comedy sketch. Like just made it really normal to get really angry.
And we noticed that this is an emerging problem when we talk to researchers who work for Amazon Alexa and are working on programming Alexa, and her response, saying her with parentheses, but how Alexa should actually respond, and they're kind of unsure how, like, what kind of counter speech should Alexa use.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
And I think we're kind of in a transition phase at the moment. I think at the very beginning, Siri, for example, whenever she received kind of a sexist comment, she would answer in a way like, oh, I would blush if I could, I think was the line that Siri used. Which is, of course, not an ideal.
No,
so it kind of it just shows you all the dimensions of technology and in our lives intersecting even more, and kind of makes you wonder how we should think about or rethink communication with automated systems.
Yeah, I remember having a conversation with my friend who was saying we went to a lecture which is about how all of these devices are kind of coded female, and how obviously you kind of brought that up, but just thinking about what it means in terms of kind of discourses about speaking to women, and how we address technology as kind of coded female in some areas, but not others, particularly in I guess Alexa, things like that, in a very domestic setting. And like where like a lot of family might be around. It's just I think what you said about how we address and kind of normalize those just like horrible ways of speaking. Yeah, I think that was really interesting. And what kind of counter speech the device might be able to actually pull up itself.
I think it's it's a real problem for these companies, because they have idea of Alexa or Siri they have a whole persona that has been designed around them.
Yeah.
Whatever kind of language they use has to fit with that persona, but it also has to kind of meet the demands of customers and users. So finding that right balance, I think, is really tricky, and also kind of shows that people working for these companies should talk more to people who are actually studying like social science.
Yeah, so there needs to be more of a kind of crossover otherwise. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's really, really interesting. I was thinking as well, this is just a slight divergent, but it used to be like, I remember when Siri was first developed, it used to be like very like funny and kind of ironic to speak, and like a big thing at my school was asking Siri to like marry you like countless times. And actually now we've kind of got to a stage where it's more normal, I think, where the kind of irony of speaking to your device, I don't think it will ever rub off completely, but yeah, it's just interesting to think how these conversations have already changed so quickly, because technology is also developing really quickly.
Which is good, I would say. It kind of reflects, languages change, the way that we communicate change. So of course the technologies that we use should ideally also change.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Conversation. So yeah, please do come along to Stefanie's talk, which will be on from 4 to 5 p.m. on the 4th April online. And make sure to follow the Cambridge Festival on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for more fascinating events.